Who is going to be the Wallabies coach after Joe Schmidt? Should he decide to call time on his Wallabies coaching career at the end of his contract, as originally agreed, after the British and Irish Lions tour next year, which is just 8 months away? We've got to decide on a new head coach should he decide to leave, who is going to be part of that team, and who could be the best candidate for that position moving forward. That's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what I'm going to hear from you guys about in the comment section below. My personal opinion is that Joe Schmidt should stay. He is the best candidate. He is the most experienced coach that we have currently, and it is clear to see that he has gotten great growth out of the players, and out of the entire team in the results. And but not only on the field, it's the little intangible things like attitude, like things like breakdown, tackle, and then also attention to detail at the ruck, as well as scrum, line out, and the rest. And it's just been a really interesting and exciting pathway to see Joe Smith take this team through this entire year. It's been big 13 tests for the Wallabies and all the players and the coaching staff, and for Joe Smith this year. And I think it's been clear to see that the growth is there and it's evident. So I think that Joe Smith staying in a full time capacity is the best option. Now, Rugby Australia executive Phil Waugh and others have talked about needing to the need to get creative to be able to keep Joe Schmidt in Australia. And the biggest reason for why he may be deciding to leave, and that is what the Raw.com is reporting, that he's more likely to leave than stay, it is because he has a son that suffers from quite severe epilepsy. And Joe Schmidt is tossing up whether he needs to go back to help his family and to help his son. And no one can begrudge him for that, because family comes first. And if he did decide to call time on his Wallabies time as coach, then he would have left the game in Australia and the team specifically in a much better place than when he got here. So that would be a great tick on his resume. Not that it needs any more ticks, because he's an extremely talented coach. But it was one of his main goals that he stated when he started with the Wallabies, and then the other one would be the British and Irish Lions, and that would all come to a head at the end of the series next year, halfway through next year, and at the end of his what is now his tenure. But should he extend and should he decide to stay up until the 2027 World Cup here in Australia, it would be an extremely awesome and great get for the Wallabies, because he provides stability, direction, focus, and detail, all the things that in the Australian rugby landscape really needs at the moment. And that stability is something that would feed down to the Super Rugby Pacific coaches. Now, because him remaining at the top of this coaching period in a pyramid and in Australia allows those coaches below him to be able to continue doing what they're doing at Super Rugby Pacific level. And we know that Australian rugby can't prosper fully if we're not succeeding at all levels of rugby. So that is domestic competition, the international club competition that we play, which is Super Rugby Pacific, as well as the international test stage for the Wallabies. And by disrupting this coaching cohort, which it is looking extremely strong for 2025 and the strongest that it's looked in several years, that would occur if we were to bring some of those coaches up into the Wallabies coaching cohort and then replacing Schmidt and perhaps some others that may leave with him in that role should he walk away. And that is assistants, that is scrum specialists, line out specialists, physios, and all that kind of support stuff that makes a team tick. And it would just be great to be able to have Schmidt there at the top of the pyramid to then allow the success and the embedding of coaches and their styles and their game plans in the Super Rugby Pacific sides to then deliver better Wallabies to Schmidt to then go on to deliver better performances on the international test arena. It just feels like that is a clear and obvious best option. But if you disagree, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. But the strongest candidate and the front runner, which is by all reports, has been reported by the Raw.com here in Australia, is that Les Kiss, the coach of the Queensland Reds, is the front runner. And he has ties with Joe Schmidt. They've both coached over in Ireland and they have very similar styles. And you could see that with the Reds this year and how that kind of transpired onto the test stage for the Wallabies, because it was high skill, high detail, high focus, high phase rugby. And although they had varying defensive systems, and although there were greater variations in and around the teams, it was very evident to see that they were both playing a very similar style of rugby. So that cohesion and the continuity of style of rugby could be a really good way to continue for the Wallabies in a head coaching perspective, should Schmidt decide to step down midway through next year. Now, there's a little bit of chat about the fact that if you're needing to get creative, you could get Schmidt in on a FIFO deal, so he'd spend a lot of time in New Zealand with his family when it's not specifically test window and test season, and then he would come back and spend the bulk of the time with the Wallabies during their test window. Now, that is one option, a bit of a hybrid option. You could also look and bringing in Les Kiss, if it was Les Kiss now, into that environment during the British and Irish Lions series, and then him taking over after that, or if Schmidt decided to carry on till the end of 2025 and carry them through the end of those tests. And so then he could bring on Les Kiss for a longer period of time to then embed some knowledge and also some structures, because this continuity is also important, that although coaches will have different words and different terminology for different things, it may actually be really impactful to be able to have that carryover and that handover to whoever the next coach is, to just allow the language to stay the same. And that is something that would benefit hugely the players, that are hearing the same systems, hearing the same calls, and then they don't have to learn new ones. And that's also part of this great aligning project that Rugby Australia is trying to achieve at the moment, with all sides, with all the Super Rugby Pacific sides, the women's, the men's, the sevens, and also all the way up to the Wallabies. So it is really an important factor that everyone should consider. Now, there are two other coaches in Australia. If Kiss was considered, that he'd be a better option to stay at the Queensland Reds. There's Dan McKellar, who's just come over from the UK and former Brumbies coach as well at the Waratahs. He's got a great team with him. He's got Mike Catt. He's got Dan Palmer that he's brought over from the UK as well. He's got Simon Louis as director of rugby. Really exciting, really, really exciting team there at the Waratahs in his first year. It'll be his first year in 2025, so it'll be a bit of a destabilizing factor for Australia's biggest rugby playing province if he came in for only one season of Super Rugby Pacific and then he was forced to move on to the Wallabies. And then you've got Stephen Larkham, who's down in the ACT coaching the Brumbies, who's been having the Brumbies as the best Super Rugby side of any side in Australia for several years. I mean, it hasn't been back since 2021 during COVID. There was a 2020, unsure on that one, but let me know in the comments below, where the Reds won the comp, Super Rugby Pacific AU. But it is clear that Stephen Larkham, who has been the coach now for a number of years and has actually extended as well previously for the Brumbies until the end of 2026, that he's actually done a great job with them. So they're all three very good Super Rugby Pacific coaches, but it does feel like as though, because Dan McKellar is coming back to Super Rugby after going to the English Prem, and because Stephen Larkham has been in this format or in this coaching role for a while, that he really needs to get something, or they rather really need to get something like a title out of a Super Rugby Pacific season before they can move on to the Wallabies gig. Now, that's not a prerequisite, that's not a must or anything like that, but it does feel like that from a viewer's perspective, that they just need to be able to take that next step. Stephen Larkham has been in so many semi-finals. Dan McKellar has been there himself. And it just feels as though, because Kiss has just come in recently, as in last year, this is his second year in his tenure, and he is a coach that's seemingly on the up with the Reds. He's not under the same pressures as Dan McKellar and Stephen Larkham are from a performance perspective rather. And then because Dan McKellar has just left, and this is the kind of joker, this is the wild card in it all, because he's just left Leicester, Michael Checker just went to Leicester, and he's only signed a 1 year deal until the end of the 2024-2025 English Premier season, which ends there in June next year, just before this handover needs to take place. And Michael Checker would have positioned himself perfectly and would have done this on purpose to then be able to come over and coach the Wallabies up until this 2027 World Cup. It's well documented that he's always wanted to return to the Wallabies. It's something that he loves. He's passionate for it. He's got the drive. He's got the experience from all over the world coaching International Rugby League, coaching the Los Pumas, the Argentine team, to World Cup semi-final last year, and then also having some club success as well, and he's doing quite well with Leicester at the moment. It does come down to personality, and it does come down to who is the best fit for rugby in Australia and also Rugby Australia, because inevitably the head coach of the Wallabies is going to have a strong relationship with the leadership team there at Moore Park. And Michael Checker in this spectrum of coaches is the fiery of the is the most fiery of the lot. It's a bit of my way or the highway with him by all reports. Although there is some speculation that he has calmed down since his time in rugby in Australia. That is since the end of 2019. But nevertheless, it's uncertain whether Phil Ward and Dan Herbert want someone as fiery and as abrasive as Michael Checker in that top role. Not necessarily saying that he would get the role all the way to the 2027 World Cup, but we're just talking about that ideally a coach would want 2 years before the World Cup as a run up to embed their game plan and get their players who they want to be part of the team up to scratch. So you've got Dan McKellar, you've got Stephen Larkham. I'm not convinced that they're the best options right now. The stability that they would be able to provide in the Super Rugby sides to then be able to be options after the 2027 World Cup is hugely exciting. So that's definitely an option there. Les Kiss is the strongest option should Schmidt not decide to stay and should he decide to leave. Schmidt through to 2027, Schmidt 2027, if that's what you want to call it, definitely the strongest option of them all. He is the best candidate with with the highest ceiling at the moment with the best team, because it's unclear whether guys like Mike Cron, Laurie Fisher, or even Ian Toulon would stay on without Schmidt, because his relationship with Schmidt's relationship with Peter Horn, and then the wider ecosystem within that assistant coaching group is extremely unique and specific. So there's no guarantee that Schmidt would be able to convince the others to stay. Not that he would try to convince them to stay, but they would stay if he did not stay. And then there's the quandary of having Michael Checker part of this equation. I personally think that he's the wrong fit right now. There's calm stability, pragmatism with Schmidt, and someone like Les Kiss would bring similar elements of that, but I'm just not sure that Michael Checker would bring that sense of calm. He'd get headlines, but I'm just not sure whether he'd be able to captivate the wider or be able to execute the broader plan behind Rugby Australia at the moment. But they're my thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts on who you think you should stay. Maybe it's Schmidt, maybe it's Kiss, maybe it's McKellar, maybe it's someone that I haven't even named. Okay, but please let me know in the comments below, because I want to hear from you. And as always, guys, this is Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown with me, John Ferguson.